Hello, guys. I hope you're all doing well and using the free time you have during the lockdown in the best of ways. In what follows is the next part of your course on phonology. This is a continuation of what we have done in class so far. It includes explanations which are followed by exercises, some of which are solved for you and others you will have the opportunity to do yourself. Now, here is what we will be doing in this course with some detail. The first item is on phonemes and allophones. Well, you remember certainly that we have covered this before in class, but we will be picking up this issue now and then as we move along. Now, the second item is on complementary distribution. We will take the necessary time to go over this part of phonological processes in the next few slides of this video. And you will have the opportunity to see problems in the process of being solved. And you will also have the chance to do this problem solving activity by yourself later on. Now, the third item is a coverage of a variety of phonological processes. We pick up assimilation first as a major phonological process, and you will see that there are a variety of processes are included under this heading. And they mainly involve how some sounds are influenced by other neighboring sounds as morphological structure changes or as the order of sounds is rearranged. Now, the next subsection deals with the syllable structure processes. These are processes that involve rearranging syllable structure by deleting or inserting items, sometimes converting segments, such as changing vowels into glides. We will also see such processes like vowel coalescence, that is when two vowels merge to make only one. Metathesis, where you have the order of segments being swapped. And neutralization, where the difference between two sounds disappears in a specific context. And finally, section 4 is going to be on phonological rules and rule formalism. This is essentially about how to convert informal phonological statements about processes that we have covered so far into formal rules. In other words, you will learn how to convert informal rules into the rule formalism that we are going to see with some detail below. So let's get started. Things can change as they move from one context to another. Adaptation to environment is a natural law that extends not just to objects and animals, but also, as we will see, to languages. Water changes as temperature changes, from vapor to ice, from ice to liquid. You might say, what does this have to do with sounds in languages? Well, it's essentially the same kind of process as sound change when they change context. In fact, this is what complementary distribution is all about. Let's have a look at personal pronouns, for example. The form of a personal pronoun changes as the pronoun shifts position from the subjective case that is when it is subject coming before the verb, to the objective case, that is when it comes after a verb or a preposition. What makes sentences A, C, and E ungrammatical while B, D, and F are grammatical? Well, the answer is simple. For each context, its specific form. It is the morphological rule that governs the variation between the subjective and the objective cases. The two forms can be considered as having mutually exclusive contexts. In other words, where one form occurs, the other doesn't. We might consider this a case of morphological complementary distribution, so to speak. This context-form relationship also extends to meaning. What the word ring means during a wedding ceremony is certainly not the same as the meaning it has during a boxing match. In fact, we might even say that meaning in language is shaped by context in ways beyond limitation. Now let's get back to complementary distribution in phonology. Consider the following example from English where we can see the difference between voiced liquids and voiceless liquids in English. The voiced liquids include a variety of contexts here where we can say examples like rope in word initial position, arrive in intervocalic position, art between a vowel and a consonant, every between a consonant and a vowel, and so on. While the voiceless liquids have an exclusively unique context, they occur only after voiceless stops. Look at the examples. Prince, tree, crab, practice, clown, plastic, etc. So there is only one context for voiceless liquids and a variety of contexts for their voiced counterparts. Recapitulate then, voiced liquids occur in word initial position, intervocalic position, between a vowel and a consonant, between a consonant and a vowel, before a final consonant, and in word final position. Following a word initial voiced stop, while the voiceless variant always occurs in one single environment, following the consonants p, t, and k, that is the voiceless stops. Again, we conclude that where the voiced variants occur, the voiceless variant doesn't. This is essentially a case of complementary distribution. In this case, we can say that the voiced and the voiceless variants are in complementary distribution. Now, once the contexts for the different variants have been identified, we need to move on to determine which of the two forms is the basic form and which is the derived form. And in order to do that, we will need to consider the criterion of frequency of occurrence. Now, what does that mean? That's what we see in the next slide. Now, in other words, we might say which of the two variants has a larger distribution than the other. The answer is, since the voiceless liquid is found in only one context, that is after a voiceless stop, and the voiced liquid occurs in a variety of contexts, or let's say elsewhere, This voiced liquid satisfies the elsewhere condition. Hence, the voiced form is the basic phoneme, while the voiceless form is an allophone because it occurs in one single specific context. The rule that draws the derived form from the basic form can be stated as follows. A voiced liquid becomes voiceless when preceded by a voiceless stop. Okay, let's look at this example from Tashleit. We compare here the simple form of the glide ear and the geminate form, ear. Look at the different contexts where each one occurs. Now let's look at the simple form first. In, that's word initial position. Ade, in word final position. Teiri, that's between a vowel and a consonant. Terielt, between a consonant and a vowel. While the geminate form, as you will see, has one single context. It always occurs between two vowels. Ayur, tawaya, miya, ski. The simple form of the glidea and its geminate counterparts are in fact in complementary distribution. Now, of course, we were answering the question, what's the context for each? We've already answered the question. We have a variety of contexts for the simple form and one single context for the geminate form. Let's recapitulate. The geminate form is limited to one context, that's between two vowels in intervocalic position, while the simple form is found in a variety of contexts as we have just seen. Now, the conclusion that we would draw from that is that since y is the phoneme because it occurs in a variety of contexts, while y is the allophone because it is limited to one single context. So here we're applying, if you remember, the principle of frequency of occurrence that says that y occurs in one context and the simple form occurs in several different contexts, therefore satisfying the condition, the elsewhere condition. I guess that rings a bell. We move on to the next slide. Now, here is a detailed example of how we go about solving a problem on complementary distribution. We're taking the example from southern Congo, and we can see that the alveolar consonants t, s, and z are in complementary distribution with ch, sh, and j. That is t with ch and s with sh and z with j. Now take your time. You might want to pause the video and take your time to look at the data carefully before you move on. Now read the following questions carefully. The first question says, state the distribution of the sounds. Where do t, s, z occur? And where do ch, sh, and j occur? The second question is about the frequency of occurrence. That is, which sounds should be taken as representing the basic phonemes and which ones as representing the derived allophones. Is it the first members, that's t, s, or z, or the second members of each pair? And the last question is, state the rule that derives the surface variants, that is the allophones, from their basic phonemes that you have proposed. Take your time to read the questions again carefully, and then we move on. Well, to make your task of specifying the different contexts easier, It is advisable to have a way of indicating each context. A chart like the following would help you determine the different occurrences for the different sounds. Now notice the variety of contexts where we find the first members of each pair. That's t, s, and z. We find them in word initial position, as you can see on the left side of your chart, between two vowels. For s, it occurs almost all the time, well, all the time, in fact, between two vowels. For z, it occurs in word initial position, and also between a nasal and a glide. Now for ch, sh, and j, it's quite easy to see that all of them occur in the same kind of context, that is just before the vowel E. So here again, we move on to the next question, if you remember, which requires you to say which of the two variants should be considered as the basic form and which one as the derived form. Now, of course, it's quite obvious to see that the first variants, that's t, s, and z, occur in a variety of contexts, while the palato-alveolar variants, that's ch, sh, and j, occur in one single environment. Indeed, we can say that the first t, s, z are the phonemes, and ch, sh, and j are the allophones. The first ones occur in a variety of contexts, that is, they satisfy the elsewhere condition, and the others occur in one single context, and that's why we say they are the allophones that are derived from the basic forms. Okay, in the following here, you have answers to the questions that we have raised concerning the data from southern Congo. So here's an example of how you go about solving a problem on complementary distribution. You first have to specify the different contexts. Then number two is to look for the frequency of occurrence of one of the two variants, that is, which one of the two variants satisfies the elsewhere condition and which one is limited to one single context. And finally, you just state the rule informally on how you derive the basic, how you derive the allophones from the basic phonemes. Here you have two pictures of the snowshoe hare. It's a rabbit that changed the color of its fur from brown in the summer to white in winter. The process occurs over 10 weeks, with the white fur appearing first on the ears and feet and gradually moving towards the body. During the spring, the reverse process happens. Just like sounds, the snow rabbit changes as the surrounding environment changes. So we might consider this a case of complementary distribution. Yeah, the next problem here is on Iwi, that's spoken in Togo and Ghana. In Iwi, the two liquids le and r never occur in identical environments. That is, they are in complementary distribution. It is possible to derive one from the other. In other words, one of them is the phoneme and the other is the allophone. Now, what you need to do is to state the rule that derives the allophone from the phoneme. In other words, the rule that governs this distribution of l and r. You have the data right in front of you. Take the time to look at the data carefully, and in the next slide, you're going to see some steps to follow. Okay, here you have the steps to follow that we have somehow already seen. if first thing you have to do is to list the set of contexts for each variant, and that's the one of the best ways to do it is to draw a chart and specify the context for each variant. Now, the next step is you try to find what feature do these contexts have in common, for example. What is it that they share? If you can specify the context using a single feature matrix, then you have laid your hand on the right solution. Now, the step 3 is where you state the rule that specifies how you derive the allophone from the basic phoneme. In other words, here you will have to go back to the elsewhere condition principle and apply it to one of the two variants, and so you can determine which one is the basic form and which one is the allophone. The next problem is on it's about language spoken in Mexico that's called Tiolabal, where you have the velar stop and the glottalized velar stop can be considered as variants of the same phoneme. In other words, one should be considered as the basic form and the other as the derived form. Now, what your task is to determine the context for each and decide which one should be considered as the basic phoneme. The next problem, so your next problem, and for the sake of more practice, is on American English, and we'll see the different variations of the liquid r, where you have the voiced r, the voiceless sh, and the syllabic r. These can be considered as being in complementary distribution, in other words, where one variant occurs, the others don't. Now you are supposed to give a description of the context for each of the variants and decide on which one should be considered as the basic, and of course the other two would be considered as the derived. Now let's read the data. So you can hear the different realizations and pronunciations of the different variants. Trap, rough, priest, arise, barn, port, Mary, hammer, professor, runner, drain, and cream. But now your last problem in this section is on Korean, and it's about different stops. They have variants for each of the stops, the bilabial stop and the alveolar t and the velar k, each one of them having different variants. Now, can we consider the sounds in each set as allophones of a single phoneme? In other words, in each group we have one phoneme and two allophones. If so, what conditions determine the placement of each, or are they separate phonemes? Now, of course, you need a hint here, which says, how do you prove that two sounds are separate phonemes? Now you remember, of course, the different steps to follow that we have seen earlier on, and you apply this to this problem on Korean. You will be receiving solutions to the problems later on, and good luck with your job.